I didn't realize it at the time, but there was someone who saw the light in me before I ever looked for it. Someone who held space for all my storms without asking me to be sunny. Who waited through my silence, who stayed through my anger, who loved me long before I knew how to receive it, and by the time I finally understood what that meant, they were already walking away. Not because they stopped loving me, but because they had given me everything they had, and I didn't know how to hold it. It was never about the words I couldn't say. It was about the ones I never knew how. To the silence was my language back then. And somehow you understood it fluently. I was always hiding behind a smile that didn't reach my eyes, but you never asked me to explain. You just stayed. The first time we met was a rainy afternoon in late October. The streets were slick with wet leaves. The world smelled like petrichor and forgotten promises. You were sitting on the library steps with a notebook in your lap, writing like the world would end if you stopped. I walked by in silence, headphones in, world shut out, but you looked up, and for some reason, I looked back. Just a glance, just enough. It should have ended there, but it didn't. Next day, you were there again, same spot, same notebook, same silence between us, except this time, you said hi. Just that hi. I nodded, didn't stop, didn't smile, but I remembered your voice for days. It had something soft in it, like it knew how to sit beside someone's grief without trying to fix it. I didn't know then that you would become the place I returned to. Not a person, not a home, but both. I used to walk by you every day, pretending I wasn't looking forward to it. You never pushed, never asked for anything, just kept being there. It made me uncomfortable how easy it was for you to exist beside me, like you weren't trying to make me better. Like you didn't expect me to be more than I was back then. I thought love came with conditions. I didn't know what it meant to be seen without being fixed, but you kept showing up day after day, like the universe had placed you there on purpose. There was a night in early November. The wind was sharp, and the street lamps flickered like they were tired. I found you still sitting there after dark, notebook closed, hands in your sleeves. You looked up when I stopped in front of you. You didn't say anything. You didn't have to. I sat beside you for the first time. That moment felt louder than most conversations. You offered me half your sandwich. I shook my head, but I stayed. We sat there until the cold wrapped around us like a second skin. Neither of us moved. Neither of us spoke, but I think that was the first time I realized you weren't going anywhere. You started drawing me without telling me. Quick sketches in the margins of your journal, half-finished lines and shadowed eyes. You said I had the kind of face people dream about but never describe. I laughed, or tried to, because no one had ever called me anything other than difficult. You didn't laugh with me. You just said it's true. And I believed you more than I wanted to. Didn't know how to receive your kindness, so I returned it in broken pieces, small smiles, unsent messages, half-hearted thank yous, but you took them all like they were gold. You never asked me to be more. You just held what I gave like it was enough. One afternoon, I found a note folded beneath my backpack. Your handwriting, small, curved, careful. It said, "You don't have to talk to be understood." I stared at it for a long time, longer than I should have, and I never told you. But I kept that note in my wallet for years. The days grew shorter, the air colder. We started walking together after class, not talking much, just steps in sync. I remember thinking, maybe this is what safety feels like. You never asked about my past, never wanted my explanations. You let me be, and in that stillness, I started breathing again. There was one evening when I almost told you everything. We were sitting at the park bench near the old fountain, the one that never worked. The sky was turning that shade of blue that only lasts for 2 minutes, and you said, if you ever need to talk, I'll listen, but I'm also okay with just sitting beside you. And that's when I knew you were the first person who loved me without needing to understand me. You started leaving little things for me, a thermos of tea on rainy mornings, sticky notes with doodles of birds and stars, a playlist called for when it's hard to breathe. Each act was small, but it told me you saw me. Even when I didn't see myself. I remember one night you told me you're not broken, you're just trying to Live in a world that taught you to hide. I wanted to cry, but I didn't. I just nodded, and that was the closest I had come to letting someone in. You never celebrated it. You just said, "I'm here," and you were for every silence, every almost. Every time I flinched at love and called it survival, you stayed until one day you didn't, not because you stopped caring, but because I kept pretending. I didn't need you because I never said thank you in the ways that mattered, because you deserved more than someone who couldn't hold what you gave. But I didn't know that then. I only knew the ache that came with your absence, the space you left, the echo of your laugh in places I stopped going to. I looked for you in every notebook, every song, every shadowed hallway, but you had already gone where I couldn't follow you. Left behind a letter I didn't find it for weeks, tucked between pages of a book you lent me. It said, "I hope one day you see yourself the way I saw you, not as someone who." There was a quiet room in the winter wing of the library. It was tucked behind forgotten shelves and a stained glass window that bled blue light across the floor. No one ever went there, no one except you. And eventually, Mew said it felt like the room could keep secrets, like it had held sorrow before and knew how to stay still beside it. I didn't ask why that mattered to you, but I understood, because silence was my native tongue, and that room didn't ask me to translate to a used to meet. There after dusk, when the light outside died gently through glass, and the air inside felt like memory you would draw, I would pretend to read. And for a little while the world outside didn't exist. Only the soft shuffle of pages, the rhythm of pencils, the closeness that didn't need words. You once sketched me leaning against the window. Lost in thought, you wrote under it, "Some people are poems long before they speak." I didn't know how to respond, so I folded that page and carried it in my bag for weeks, like a shield, like proof that someone saw something beautiful in me. Even if I couldn't tone. Evening, you asked, "Do you ever wonder what it would feel like to be held without flinching?" I nodded before I realized, because that was the ache inside me I never named. You didn't say anything else, just moved a little closer, your shoulder barely brushing mine. And somehow that was more honest than any confession. The days grew colder. Snow began to drift across the stone paths outside, but the room stayed warm because you were there, and maybe for the first time, so was I. You made up names for the shadows that flickered across the stained glass. You said they were ghosts of unfinished thoughts. I laughed, but part of me believed you, because you had a way of making imagination feel sacred, not silly. Like a language the world had forgotten, but you still spoke fluently once. You brought in a candle, lit it, and said, "This is what hope looks like when the world forgets to be kind." It flickered tiny golden, and I stared at it longer than I should have, because I didn't know how to hold hope without fear. One night you weren't there. I waited, watching the blue light pool around the books. I waited until the candle burned itself out and the shadows returned unnamed. The next day, you showed up with red eyes and shaking hands. You said I almost didn't come back. I didn't ask why, just reached for your hand. And this time, you let me. You never told me what happened. I never asked, because sometimes presence is the answer. And I needed you to know that I was learning slowly how to be the kind of person who stays. You told me about your grandmother, how she raised you to believe that softness wasn't weakness, how she used to say, "Be gentle in a world that isn't." I memorized that line like scripture because I needed something to believe in, and you were starting to feel like a faith. One afternoon, you didn't speak at all. You just handed me a small box. Inside was a piece of broken mirror, edges sanded smooth, back painted with gold. You said, "So you can see yourself the way I do." I didn't know how to say thank you, so I just held it close to my chest like a heartbeat. You never asked for anything, never demanded love in return, but I started wanting to give it. Not out of obligation, but because you deserved something whole, and I wanted to try, even if I didn't know how. Started showing up before you did, warming the room with small lights, making space for your silence, bringing books I thought you might like. It felt new to think of someone other than myself, not out of guilt, but Caraway began writing in a shared journal, passing it back and forth. No rules, just thought sketches, fragments you once wrote. I think healing begins when someone sees your worst and says, "I'm still here," I wrote. I think you're right. We didn't talk about what we were, didn't name it, didn't box it, because sometimes love doesn't need architecture, it just needs air. But somewhere inside, I was beginning to believe that maybe I could be more than what hurt me, that maybe love didn't have to arrive like thunder. Maybe it could be soft and slow and steady, like the way you looked at me, like the way you waited. I remember the night I almost kissed you. We were leaving the room, snow falling silently outside. You turned to say something, but I forgot how to listen because all I could see was the light catching in your eyes. But I couldn't, because some fears run deeper than want, and I didn't want to ruin what we had. Even if my chest ached with the almost, you didn't mention it, but you smiled softer the next day, and I think you knew you always did. One morning, I found the journal left on my doorstep, no note, just a sketch on the last page of me sleeping beside a window, with your jacket around my shoulders and written beneath it, "Even when you can't, I will." I sat on my bed for hours, staring at that drawing, because it wasn't just paper, it was a promise, and I was beginning to believe in those again. You didn't need to fix me, and for the first time, I didn't want to be fixed. I just wanted to be with you in the silence, in the stillness, in the sacredness of something unspoken. And maybe that was love, not the loud kind, but the kind that sits with you in the winter wing and says, I know, and I'm not going anywhere." There are some nights that feel like unraveling, like the thread of yourself begins to slip from the spool, and you can feel the fray before it begins. That night was one of them. I hadn't slept. Not really. The world had felt too loud all week. Every voice, every glance, every reflection, it all felt like it wanted something from me. I wandered the streets instead of going home. The sky was heavy with fog, the streetlights bleeding soft circles onto the pavement, and I walked without direction, just to feel like I existed somewhere, even if only as a shadow. My phone buzzed once. It was you. A single message, "Where are you?" I didn't answer. I kept walking until the streets turned into silence, until the city forgot I was there, until I could sit alone on a rusted bench beside the river, watching the water move like it knew secrets I'd never touch. Thought about jumping, not to end something, but to quiet something, to make the ache less, to feel weightless, just for a moment, just enough to forget. But then I heard it, your voice, somewhere behind me. Not loud, not panicked, just, there you are, like you had been searching, like you always would. Die. Didn't turn around, not at first, but I heard your footsteps, soft against the gravel, steady like a heartbeat returning. You didn't sit beside me. You stood just a step behind and said, "I won't ask if you're okay. I just want you to know I'm here." That silence stretched between us like a rope fraying at both ends, but somehow it held. I finally looked at you, and in your eyes I didn't see pity or panic or judgment. I saw recognition. You walked slowly, sat beside me, placed something in my hand, a stone painted with gold leaf, cracked down the middle. "You," whispered Kintsugi, then added, "Things break, but that doesn't mean they stop being beautiful." I held that stone like it was a lifeline, and maybe it was, because the ache didn't go away, but it quieted just a little. You didn't fill the silence, you just existed inside it with me, and that was enough. When I finally stood, my legs shook, but your hand found mine and steadied the tremble. Without needing to own it, without needing me to explain, you walked me home. No words, just presence, like a lantern in the fog. And when we reached my door, you didn't ask to come in. You just said, "Text me if you need to, or if you don't." Then walked away like you trusted I would stay inside. I stared at that stone for hours, tracing the gold lines with my fingers, thinking of how many times I had tried to hide the cracks, and how maybe they were the most human part of May. Texted you just one word. "Thank you," you replied. "No need. Just rest." The next morning I found another message, "I'm proud of you," and I broke because I didn't know I needed to hear that until I did. We met in the winter wing again. But it felt different now, not heavier, just more real. Like the silence wasn't emptiness, but understanding you. Brought tea in a thermos, said it's warm like you, and smiled that soft smile that made me want to believe. Why? Told you about the night, not everything, just enough, and you listened with your whole face, not interrupting, not reacting, just holding the story like it was something fragile and sacred. When I finished, you didn't say it would be okay, you just said, you're still here. And that matters, and somehow that was more than enough. We made a new rule after that: if either of us ever felt like disappearing, we'd say the code word lighthouse, because lighthouses don't move, they wait, they shine. They keep people from drifting too far. Even in storms, you painted one on the wall of the winter wing, tiny tucked behind a dusty book. It became our secret, our promise. There were days I still struggled, still felt the old ache rise like a tide, but now there was you. There was a place to go, a voice to call, a reason to stay. You said healing wasn't a ladder. It was a spiral, sometimes forward, sometimes back, but always a movement. I believed you, because you never rushed me, never tried to make me leap when I could barely crawl. You just sat beside me, match in hand, lighting every shadow I was willing to show. You once wrote in the journal, I don't love you because you're healed. I love you because you're real. I read that line again and again, until it became a rhythm, a quiet song inside me, and slowly I began to speak more, smile, more trust. More I began to show up, not just for you, but for myself. There were still bad days, but they didn't feel eternal, because now I had memories that were warm places, that felt safe hands, that didn't flinch. You gave me a birthday gift, a box filled with letters, each sealed with wax, each labeled for different moments. Open when you feel empty, open when you want to give up, open when you forget who you are. I cried, reading them, not because they were sad, but because they were proof that someone planned for my darkness and loved me anyway. You weren't trying to save me, you were just trying to stay. And that meant more than any rescue. There was a day in spring when the light through the glass turned gold. It had been weeks since we last sat in the winter wing, not because anything was wrong, but because everything was becoming something else. Something unfamiliar, something new. More. You had started watching me more like you were waiting for a new version of me to walk in, and I think maybe I was. We still had our tea, still had our small, quiet rituals, but there was something lingering in your eyes, like a thought you hadn't dared speak aloud. And one day, you left a letter on my seat before I arrived, folded into the shape of a bird, with my name written in ink, the color of rain. I didn't open it right away. I let it sit between my fingers, let it breathe, because something in me already knew this wasn't just any letter. When I finally unfolded it, your words hit me like wind against glass, not loud, not sharp, but enough to shake something inside you. Wrote, I think sometimes you'll leave, and I paused there because that line alone felt like a confession, not of your doubt in me, but of the fear you had learned from everyone else who left too soon. Continued, I think sometimes you'll walk away without meaning to, not because you don't care, but because you've only just learned how to stay. And I read it twice, 3 times, let each word carve a path deeper than the last. You said I wrote this not because I expect you to disappear, but because I needed to say it before I got too afraid, before I told myself that silence was safer than hope. And I understood then you had always been the lighthouse, but lighthouses can feel lonely too, even when they're lit. You wrote about the first time we met, how broken I looked, how alive I still were. You said you looked like someone who had decided to keep breathing out of spite. And I loved that line made me close my eyes, because no one had ever seen that part of me. The part that didn't survive for beauty, but for rebellion, for grit. You told me in the letter that loving me didn't mean fixing me, but watching me bloom from ashes. And I realized you had never expected me to be whole, only honest. At the end of the letter, you had written, if you ever leave, I'll understand, but I'll keep the winter wing warm anyway, just in Case I cried, not because I planned to go, but because you had already built a home inside your heart for my return. Even if it never came when I walked in and saw you, I didn't say anything. I just sat beside you, laid the letter between us, like an offering, and whispered, "I'm not going anywhere." Your eyes glistened, but you didn't speak. You just reached for my hand, held it like a truth that day. We didn't need laughter, we didn't need light. We just needed presence, and we gave it to each other without question, without end, the weeks that followed. I started showing you things I had never shown anyone, the box of old poems, the broken watch I still kept from my childhood. The scar behind my ear I never spoke about. You never asked why, you just listened, and maybe that was the answer all along. You brought me a candle blue handboard, you said, "For the nights when it feels too quiet, let this be my voice." And I did. I lit it one night when I woke up breathless, and I swear it felt like you were sitting beside me. Started writing letters too. Not for you to read now, but for someday, for later, for maybe. Titled them things like, "When I couldn't see my own worth," and "The morning I chose not to disappear," each one a piece of myself I never knew how to speak aloud. But through the ink, I started understanding the me you always saw. One day I found you asleep in the winter wing, a book resting on your chest, your fingers curled like a dream, still holding on, and in that moment I realized you were tired to not of me, but of loving without knowing if it would be returned, and I sat beside you, watched the rise and fall of your breath, and promised I would find a way to love you back, not just in silence, not just in survival, but fully. When you woke, I was still there. And you smiled like it meant the world, because maybe Dee brought you a letter that day. One I wrote at midnight, titled, "You Saved Me," without ever trying to. In it, I wrote, you were never the cure, but the comfort, the warmth, that said you don't have to be fixed to be loved. And I meant every word. We started making plans, not big ones, just soft futures. Books we'd read, places we'd walk, things we'd cook together. And one day, you asked, what if we just stayed? And I knew what you meant. Not the place, but the choice, the commitment to remain even when the winds changed. Said, let's stay. And we pinky promised, like kids, like poets, like people who had been broken but chose each other anyway. There were still quiet fights, misunderstandings, tired days. But none of it shook the foundation we had built, because we had learned that love wasn't a feeling. It was a decision made 1,000 times in silence. You wrote one more letter. This time folded like a star inside it, said, I think I was always waiting for someone like you, someone who didn't run. It happened on a quiet morning, the kind where even the birds seemed to hum instead of sing. The window was cracked open, and the world outside felt like it was waiting, just like why I had made tea the way you liked it, with too much honey and no apologies. You were sitting on the floor by the bookshelf, reading something about stars, your fingers following each line like it was leading you home. And maybe it was I, stood there for a long time watching you, not like someone looking, but like someone remembering. Every version of you, every season of us, and something inside me stirred, not the usual ache, not the fear, not the echo of leaving, but something else. Something calm, like a candle that had burned long enough to become part of the room I sat beside. You passed you your cup, and you smiled, not wide, just enough, the kind of smile that says, I'm still here. We didn't talk, not at first, we never rushed mornings. You taught me the art of patience, the beauty of shared silence. And then I said it, not loud, not dramatic, just soft, like it had always lived in my mouth. I love you, you froze. Not because you didn't believe it, but because you had waited too long to hear it. Sure. Eyes filled with something that looked like relief, and also like a dream coming true. After so many nights of doubt, you didn't speak right away. You just leaned your head against my shoulder and breathed, like you'd been holding your breath for years. I repeated it, I love you, and I meant it, not because I had healed, not because I was perfect, but because I finally believed I could. You whispered, you don't have to say it, just because I did. And I smiled, I'm saying it because I finally believe you meant it. You looked at me then really looked like you were seeing me for the first time, and maybe you were, because this was a different me, not the one who flinched at kindness, not the one who ran when things got close, but the one who stayed, who softened, who chose we. Spent the day like that, close, quiet, safe. At one point, you brought out a box, old, worn, held together with string and memory. Inside were things you'd saved. The first note I ever wrote you, a photo I didn't know you took, a feather from the park bench where I once broke down. You said these were the pieces I held on to, even when you didn't believe you were worth holding, and I wept not because it hurt, but because someone loved me like this. Through storms, through silence, through the years. I disappeared inside myself. We laid everything out on the floor, built a little museum of memory, and laughed at how far we'd come. From awkward strangers to this, you brought out a journal, one I hadn't seen, and in it were letters you never gave me, dozens, hundreds, written on nights when I shut you out, or when I didn't reply for weeks, or when I smiled but looked far away. You said, I didn't give them to you because I knew you weren't ready. But I wrote them because I couldn't keep the love inside. I read them all slowly, carefully, like reading a map back to myself. Fanned somewhere between page 50 and page 70, I realized you had loved every version of me. Even the ones I couldn't face. That night, we lit the blue candle, the one you gave me months ago, and we just sat there, two shadows, two hearts, two stories finally meeting in the middle. I asked, did you ever think I'd say it back? You said some days yes, some days no, but I never stopped hoping. I kissed your hand, held it like it was the first good thing I'd ever touched without fear, and I promised I'll spend the rest of my life saying it in every way. Weeks passed, then months, and we became a rhythm, not perfect, not without mistakes, but real. Steady, tender. You started painting again, and I wrote poems on the back of your sketches, sometimes just a line, sometimes a whole storm. We hung them in the hallway, a gallery of our healing. One day, you caught me humming something soft, something I used to sing as a child, and you said, I think that's the sound of someone who's finally come home. Nodded because I had not to a place but to myself, to you, to the love I finally accepted. Anniversary of the day we met, we walked to the park. Sat on the same bench, the one with the rusted edge and the tree that leaned a little too far left. You gave me a letter, not folded like a bird, not shaped like a star, just a plain page with a single line. You are the friend I waited my whole life to find. I held it like treasure because it was I gave you one, to not written, just spoken. I finally see myself through your eyes, and I love what I see. And you cried, and I didn't stop you because I knew sometimes tears are just proof of how far we've come. We've watched the sky turn from gold to indigo, and I whispered, thank you for not giving up even when I gave up on myself. You leaned your head on my shoulder and said, you're the greatest story I've ever witnessed, and for once, I believed it.